Let's go to the pub. There's a great pub just up here. So a lot of the first pubs on the goldfields would have been what was known as sly grog tents. And grog is an old nautical term for alcohol, but these were typically illegal sort of sneaky outlets for alcohol. There's an artist, S.T. Gill, who travelled through the goldfields in the really early days and drew what he saw. I think he had an appreciation that he was looking at a fairly unique time in history. And he's drawn a few of these, and you see them as just tents on the road going through to places or in the goldfields. And there's often depicted with sort of bottles of whiskey being dealt out the back of the tent, and they advertise selling coffee and food, but they're actually a bit of an illegal pub. When we say illegal pub, but really there was no authority on these goldfields in the very early days to register it with, so you couldn't set up a legal pub if you wanted to. But sly grog tents were apparently were everywhere. Oh, that's right. So this is the former Reservoir Hotel at Crusoe. And this would have actually been a pretty cool spot. So this was actually the old road through, I'm pretty confident. There wouldn't have been a heap of traffic back then though. The reservoir level was actually much higher and pretty much just lapped the other side of the bank here. So it would have been right on the water. And actually a pretty cool location. It's been closed obviously for a long time now, but it's a pretty cool old pub. Now, one of the things you might notice if you're paying attention here is we have two doors very, very close together. And this isn't uncommon in early pubs. And what this probably was one was an entrance to a bar and one was a parlour. And the bar was for the men. The women and the families and the meals tend to be served in the parlour, which was a much quieter, less rowdy space. And it also meant people could go in, buy alcohol to take away at the parlour and not have to go through the noisy bar. If you think of today's pubs, there's a bistro entrance. Usually you don't have to go through the bar to get into the food section. So just a few remnants of the garden. If you're my age, this was the caretaker's cottage. The caretaker was up here to make sure kids like me didn't get in to play in the reservoir here, which was off limits back then. It's now a great big reserve. It's pretty cool. Come and have a look. If you're an adventurous developer, this site is actually for sale and you can buy not only a historic pub, but a fairly unique piece of land and a fairly unique location. I've thought about it, but not that rich. So, there's a great pub over here in Golden Square. We're getting here. This one will work. This is the Hibernian Hotel, and it's one of the really old but solid pubs. And it's closed too. Unfortunately, the Hibernian shut down this year. One of the things that's surprising about these pubs is in the early days there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, so The rooms in pubs were often used for formal meetings, sometimes government functions, business meetings. Often this sort of business was conducted in the rooms at the back of these old hotels, and these pubs were no exceptions. Even things like inquiries, croning inquiries, court inquiries are sometimes held in pubs. One of the more bizarre traditions that happened in the really early days in the goldfields is that bodies were often kept in the pub basement. The basements were the only cool places around. There was no refrigeration. So sometimes if someone died unexpectedly, the body was kept here until it could go somewhere else or until the inquiry was held, sometimes at the pub. Quite a few of the basements of these have sort of stories about hauntings. I'm not sure if you believe in that stuff or not, but anything's possible. If any place is going to be haunted, it's probably the basement of a pub. Anyway, let's find another one. Eagle Hawk Railway Station. It's quite a walk, actually. There's a pub here, and there was a pub near a lot of railway stations. So if you can imagine people coming to town railway stations, they need accommodation, they need food, but old steam engines too often had to stop and take on water, new coal, build up pressure again. So there was often 20-minute sort of scheduled stops at railway stations. Good opportunity for someone to get off the train, run over, grab something to eat, have a drink, and bada bing, bada boom. Always catch the next train up into town. And in the old days, they were pretty regular too, so you may not be actually waiting that long. Railway hotels in almost every town. And here's, oh yeah, this one closed too. 2018, not that long ago. Gold Rush to 2018. Popular live music venue as well. Railway hotels. There's something else down here. It's art, apparently. Anyway, I'm here on View Street. This is the Temperance Hall. I'll show you some pictures from the other side. It's a magnificent building. The core of it goes back to the 1860s, and Varland, who was a Goldfields architect, had a big role in it. This was the headquarters for the temperance movement. So basically, the temperance movement was a bunch of people who believed that alcohol was a really negative thing and a bad impact on society. It caused people to spend money they couldn't afford. It was a major driver for domestic violence and health issues, etc., yada, yada. And at the end of the day, they're not wrong. It is all those things. So this is the Temperance Hall, and this is where they would have meetings. This is where they plan things. They'd have social functions, dinners, concerts, dances here for non-drinkers. Show you could have a good time without drinking. They argued that basically Bendigo had quite a drinking issue back in the gold rush era. So in the 1870s, apparently there was a pub in Bendigo, Sandhurst as it was known then, for every 68 odd people. One pub to 200 people was much more normal. So it was certainly an issue here. And they campaigned about having that reduced and limiting the hours people could drink. This is the same sort of ideology that brought about prohibition in America, where in a lot of states they actually banned alcohol altogether. It's the same sort of thinking. It's driven partly by Protestant religion, by particularly Methodist Baptist ideology, but also just a sense that alcohol is a disruptive and harmful thing. And look, they're not wrong. I sometimes wonder if we need a temperance movement for methamphetamine today, but... So did they have a drinking problem in the goldfields? Well, they certainly drank. But let me tell you a story and you can make up your mind. So, just down over here. So this tan-coloured building behind me is the Beehive Chambers. And for most of our generation, it's been pretty locked up and you can't have a look at it, but this is actually a really important building in early Bendigo. The top floor housed the gold exchange. So where people would come and buy and sell gold, basically. Sometimes, apparently, the street out the front was so blocked with people all the way out here lined up to go into the gold exchange to sell their gold. And I take it there were multiple buyers there, so you could trade off against each other, and this is probably where you got the best prices. So The rest of the offices were fancy businesses. The high-end businesses would have their offices in here, and there were stores and shops down the bottom floor. And there's a little arcade in there. There's actually some work underway now at the moment to restore it and bring it back to some of its former glory. It's an amazing old building. But it's not the original beehive, because in the 1870s, the original beehive burnt down and it had to be rebuilt. 5 a.m. on an August morning, one of the people was in there, noticed the fire in the office next door. He was in there writing some reports that were to go on the early train through to Melbourne. He raised the alarm nearly straight away. Fire brigade responded, but the whole building was lost. It burnt to the ground, and that might have happened anyway, but a lot of people lost money, a lot of people lost stuff, and they were very, very upset about it. And things is compounded by the fact that some of the firefighters who responded were clearly intoxicated. They were quite drunk. So some of them were really struggling with equipment, some of them were very slow, some of them were drunk. One firefighter in particular was still taking slugs of brandy as he went along. Now, it was 5 a.m. on an August morning, so it was probably close to 0 degrees out here, and he was arguing it was to keep him warm. That firefighter got so drunk that eventually the police grabbed him, detained him, and threw him in the lockup to sober up. It wasn't a good look for the brigade. Now, the actions of a couple of people shouldn't taint the whole brigade, but the temperance movement sort of seized on this, and maybe it was a little bit political because they had an agenda, right? But they ended up forming a second rival fire brigade. So Bendigo had its regular fire brigade of volunteers, and it had a temperance fire brigade of sworn non-drinkers. And the temperance brigade operated almost in competition, not that anyone was getting paid, to the main brigade. And the temperance brigade actually began to build quite a reputation very quickly for being efficient and clean and very good at what they did. Fire brigades competed in competitions where they all go and practice their skills of laying hoses and running around and going up ladders and stuff. And the temperance brigade was very, very quickly a very competitive team. They had something to prove, right? And they probably sharpened up the performance of all the other brigades who weren't going to be shown up by these newcomers. But yeah, Bendigo developed its own fire brigade of non-drinkers. That probably suggests we did have a drinking problem, right? Anyway. So we are left with this really cool image of the fire in the beehive building. So really early in the morning, August, you can see lots and lots of detail in this image. So in the air, all this black stuff here, this is little bits of paper, of fabric and stuff that's being lifted by the updraft. A lot of it's still burning. It's not bats. As far as I know, we didn't have bats until quite recently in Bendigo. Maybe we had them years ago. I don't know. But you can see that doing its thing through there. So probably the whole roof of the building's gone at this stage and it's all coming up from inside. You can see on the veranda, there's a lot of debris there. So the top of the veranda is probably caving in at this point. The apparatus they're using is a hand pump. And there's 4 beefy blokes on either side of it, presumably. You push up on one side, pull down on the other side, back and forward, and it uses a sort of bellow motion to pump water. The town didn't have articulated water. It didn't have water mains at this point. Would come a few years later, but my understanding is they had some cisterns in town that were probably filled from the drains and the gutters that they could use for firefighting purposes. So I'm guessing it's drafting out of one of those, but I really don't know. You can see there's a pile of valuables here, so stuff they've dragged out of sections that weren't on fire when they first got there, chests, sofas, whatever they had, whatever they could get their hands on to prevent it from burning. The pumping apparatus is actually running like 3 or 4 jets of water, which is actually quite a volume of water, so it's doing a good job. You can see they're concerned about it spreading to the building next door. They've actually got into it, probably broken in, and they're removing stuff from there to stop it from burning. They're also up on the ladder here, working up into the roof to try and stop it getting through the space up there. So it's a pretty cool image, a pretty cool overview of the firefight they had.
The smoke hangs low like a faded gray veil. Whiskey in my glass, watching you inhale. You're sitting by the window, Street lights on your skin, a slow and easy silence. Let the games begin. Bartenders polishing the same old glass. Time moves slower here, letting moments pass. I catch a glance across the room, a flicker of a smile. You hold it for a second, then you look away in style. So pour a little slower, talk a little low, in this midnight confession under neon glow. I'm not looking for forever, just a hint of your touch in this tipsy little moment, girl. I want you much too much.
Have you ever wondered why hotels have such visual names? You know, the butcher shop doesn't call itself the Black Swan or the Speckled Hen, right? So the tradition goes back to sort of medieval traditions, particularly in England, where pubs were public houses. They were literally houses where they would brew a batch of beer. Beer didn't last very long, so when the batch was there, they would open the house up to the public and they'd come in and have a drink just for a short period of time while the batch was good. And over time it grew into people's primary business and they'd have batches on the go and always be selling beers. And that was the early public houses. Now, because they were just houses and hard to distinguish from other buildings, they put signs out the front. A lot of the population were illiterate, so they have something visual that you could draw. So something like a black swan, the golden goose, the speckled hen. Something you could put on a sign that if you're illiterate, it didn't matter. You knew where that meant. We're going down to the farmer's dog, the Queen's Arms. And if you didn't read, you could still find out where that was and you knew from the sign. Pub naming. So anyway, there's a great pub just up here. We're finally going to get a drink. So this is the Jobs Gully Railway Hotel. It predates this bridge, which makes a lot more sense, right? Here's the railway line. It was all flat when this was built. And here we are, Jobs Gully Hotel, finally. Oh yeah. Oh, this way. So over here is the Shamrock Hotel, one of the iconic pubs, probably in Victoria from the Gold Rush era. Certainly the most impressive of the surviving pubs in Bendigo, and probably the most impressive one we had. One of the stories about the high-end pubs in Bendigo in the Gold Rush is they used to have ice that was imported from overseas, shipped to Australia, and you could have that shipped off and put in your drink to keep it cold. Remembering there was no refrigeration in the era. When I first heard this story, I thought, surely that's not right, that can't be possible. But I had a look into it and it's at least possible. I'm going to let Whiteboard Ben explain this one. What? Oh, yeah, okay. No, it seems genuine. I didn't think this story was right either. It's quite crazy, but my wife's been drawing my whiteboard for me because I'm copying some slack about my drawing, so this is hopefully a little clearer for you. This is the Pacific Ocean. So in the 1800s, there was an international ice trade, and it usually centered around Boston. There was a couple of other places doing it, but Boston was the primary port for this trade. And basically, Boston and New England in America is very, very cold and has great big freshwater lakes, and they would freeze over these quite thick in winter. And what they were doing was harvesting this ice, throwing it in warehouses, popping it on ships and selling it to places that didn't have it, bearing in mind no one could actually manufacture ice. So it was actually exported all over the world in that era, and including places like India, and all the way to Melbourne, Australia would get shipments of ice reasonably regular from Boston, which seems crazy because it comes out here. There was no Panama Canal. They had to cross through, it comes out up here actually, they had to cross through the tropics and all the hottest parts of the planet and all the way across the Pacific to Melbourne. Then it would be sold to the high-end restaurants to put into drinks and for keeping food fresh and whatever else they needed to do with ice. And if there was a surplus, apparently, it would get put in a wagon and shipped up to Bendigo or to Ballarat, where it got put into drinks and other purposes, which is crazy. So people in Bendigo at certain points could go and pay a premium, and my God, it must have not been cheap, because imagine all the work that went into it, and have some ice in their drink that came from Boston. It's crazy, but yeah, it was true. The thing that gets me, there's glaciers on the South Island of New Zealand. Someone could have uncut this trade very, very easily. Didn't happen. So in the 1850s, technology came along to refrigerate, and it took off in Australia early on, where we needed ice from sources and refrigeration, and commercial ice supply became a thing. But the Boston ice lingered on for a little bit because it was more popular. It apparently tasted better, or was a bit colder, was the phrase often referred to. I don't know how that works, but yeah, Boston ice in Bendigo. Seems crazy, but yeah, it's true. For you and me, the milk bar is where Mum used to send you with 30 cents when they wanted to get rid of you for a while, or you had to go and get some milk. It was a convenient corner store. I'm going to get run over here. Ah, cars everywhere. So, milk bars, $6. So for us, milk bars are a convenience store they used to have out in the suburbs, and there's still a handful of them left. And a few in Bendigo. Some, ironically, are in old pubs. The origin of the milk bar, though, is partly in the temperance movement. So they were literally bars for serving milk. They were an alternative to the pub. Instead of going to the pub for a beer, you could go to the milk bar and have a healthy alternative. You could have a milkshake and, go and socialize there instead. Enjoy life without alcohol. The temperance movement doing its thing. One of the big successes for the temperance movement was, for a while, they actually lobbied with other groups to have the closing hour of pubs to 6 o'clock. So most nights the pubs would shut at 6. People would knock off work, run down to the pub, smash down as much beer as they could, knock off at 6, out of the pub, get kicked out. And yeah, I imagine you could still do some damage in now if you really set your mind to it. But anyway, we probably did limit the alcohol for a bit. There's not much happening in the suburb. Let's go into town. That's where I left it. Let's go.